More than 700 post office branch managers were prosecuted between 1999 and 2015 in relation to the faulty Horizons IT system. Until today, only 93 of these people have had their convictions overturned so far. Joining me in the studio now, TalkTV's chief political commentator, Peter Cardwell. Hello, Peter.
Hi.
And joining me down the line, Tony Collins, the former editor of Computer Weekly, who's been following this case for years. Let's start with you, Peter. So we've got Rishi Sunak taking action, kind of seemingly gliding over the fact that this has been pulsating and throbbing, not below the surface, but above the surface for decades. I've said all week, I think I first interviewed Nick Wallace about this and met one of the beleaguered and wronged postmasters about 16 years ago. So it was out there, it was in the open, it was being exposed, people were talking about it. And yet somehow Rishi Sunak seems to gloss over the fact that it's taken an ITV drama to goad the government into action, a huge tide of public opinion for the government to do anything about this. Really, he should, I think, own the fact that that is disgraceful.
Yes, and that's a sort of mini scandal within this scandal.
Yes.
But there was brilliant journalism done by Computer Weekly, by Private Eye, by other publications in regard to the Horizon scandal. But this public pressure has been mounting since the ITV drama, 4-part drama and a documentary as well. And really the public pressure, the political pressure was there. There are certain MPs and members of the House of Lords who've been talking about this for years, who've been trying to push this forward. They've finally got the momentum in order to do so. And what's interesting is often there are people, members of the public, who might have heard a bit about this, might have read a little bit about it, but hadn't had it crystallised, hadn't had it put forward in such a clear way as in the last few weeks. And now the government's been pressured into action. It's bold. It's a very, very interesting move as well, in that they're essentially not things aren't going to the Criminal Cases Review Commission and then the Court of Appeal, but actually this legislation will override what the courts do. So there are implications for the rule of law, and there are some lawyers who aren't happy about it in terms of the precedent it sets. Not that these people shouldn't be compensated, not that they shouldn't have their convictions overturned, but there are some worries about what it means for the legal system in the future. So that'll be very interesting as well, both legally and politically.
Let me bring Tony Collins into this. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, you're the former editor of Computer Weekly. You've been following this case for years. Peter's just mentioned, your publication's contribution to outing this story, bringing it out of the shadows and into the light. How are you responding to what's happening now, this momentum of public opinion and the government finally being provoked into doing something about it? Can't hear you. Your Computer Weekly, you will know how to turn your audio on, I'm quite sure, as you're a tech wizard. So while we sort out the tech wizard and his audio, let's talk to Peter about this instead. Let's talk about compensation. One of the things I've just said introducing this item is there's going to be a way of expediting payments of £75,000 to various of the people who've suffered all this injustice. From all of the stories I've covered personally, plus all of the things that I've been reading this week, it strikes me that can't possibly be enough money, even minutely to scratch the surface, because most of them, all of them, were selling personal items, jewellery, pensions, their homes, and putting money in to try to stuff in the shortfall. So it's thousands and thousands of pounds, isn't it?
And you've got to ask the question, what about, there are different people who have been affected in different ways. The people who've gone to prisons, people who lost their homes, the people who've gone bankrupt. How do you actually compensate someone for going bankrupt? Do you declare them not bankrupt? How does that work out after a number of years? Also, do they get compensation? What about their relatives who they've perhaps borrowed money off? Also, if this has affected you for 15 or 20 years of your life, loss of earnings and so on. So these 75,000 interim payments, that's really just to tide people over. That is going to be hopefully worked out by the end of the year. That's what the government wants to do. And we will see what comes next after that. But you could have people, the compensation could well go into millions for even individual cases. Because if you think about it, if you've lost your home, your business, and you calculate everything all together, you could be into, over a long period, over a decade in many cases, you could be into a heck of a lot of money. And that's just one case, never mind the 700 or so people who are affected.
And in many instances, these people, men and women, haven't just lost their homes, their reputations, their good name, their money, their personal items, indeed, that they've had to sell, but also, as you rightly say, their marriages, and what's more, their health. We keep hearing that these people, these human beings who had to live through this injustice, are not the people they were.
Well, some of them
they've had all kinds of nervous reactions and mental health issues and physical health and autoimmune diseases, all kinds of things. And in every case, when they either describe themselves or somebody else describes them, they say, he's not the man he was. She's not the woman she used to be. I read this incredibly moving interview with the man who had been the sub-postmaster at Hampstead Post Office. And he was one of the gentlemen who had forced to serve a prison sentence. And he talked about his life since. And in the 20 years since, he's got a wife and children, but he hasn't really made friends outside the family because he couldn't really trust anybody. He hasn't enjoyed a social life because he hasn't felt confident enough. He tried to keep the fact that he'd been in prison hidden from people, so he didn't like to mix with people. And his whole life has been kind of completely curtailed and limited by the aftermath of being the person wrongly accused and then wrongly convicted, wrongly incarcerated. His whole life, all of it, including and right up till today.
And it could well continue to be defined by it, because if you then go, if someone then says, oh gosh, that must be so terrible for you, you're now a hero, you're applauded when you go into the room, that has a psychological effect as well. For people who all they wanted to do was run a successful small business as a sub-postmaster, sub-postmistress, use whatever technology was there to balance the books. And, you know, these are not people who've sought the limelight. These are people who've been thrust into it. There's some people we'll never hear from because they're too ashamed, even though they know they've done nothing wrong. So it really has a big psychological effect. And what price would you put on a year of your life on a prison sentence of 6 months? You know, it's very, very hard to have any compensation that would deal with that.
I mean, he said he was absolutely terrified. He was an Asian gentleman, and when he was locked in prison, when the door clanged shut, he was imprisoned with somebody who'd been banged up for racially aggravated assault. So he was physically terrified being locked in a cell with this man who was known to be racist, and that's why he was in prison.
I can't really think of anything. I mean, there have been people who've taken their own lives. There have been terrible mental health problems as well. But in terms of a physical thing that can happen to you, a place that you could be, being locked in a cell, knowing you have done nothing wrong, must be absolute mental torture. And
you know what he said in the interview? He said that at least his wife believed he'd done nothing wrong. He said, whereas in some cases, your actual wife or husband or partner didn't believe you, thought you had been dishonest.
Well, there were divorces because people said, you know, you have brought shame upon our family and you've done all these things. It's really awful. So the government really is trying to get a grip on this, move forward with this. And I think there are MPs like David Davis. He asked an urgent question today in Parliament. The Prime Minister did mention it at Prime Minister's Questions, first Prime Minister's Questions of the year as well. So it really is something that the government is doing something about. It'll be interesting with the legislation. Labour will probably support it.
Let's bring Tony Collins into this, former editor of Computer Weekly. Obviously, this case very close to your heart indeed. I wonder what your thoughts are about the government being goaded into action by an ITV drama.
Well, the ITV drama was basically fantastic, right? Great act.
No, we have not managed to conquer the technological issues, even though you are the former editor of Computer Weekly, as I say. We still can't hear you.
Vanessa, I know someone who was once on a Zoom with Tim Berners-Lee, the man who invented the World Wide Web.
I know who he is, yeah.
And they had to say, Tim, you need to come off mute. So he had invented the World Wide Web and
I'm
couldn't
not blaming Tony Collins.
No,
I'm
I'm
just
sure it's not
saying
his
there
fault.
is some irony there, not being able to talk to him about this. So let me suggest something. When these sub-postmasters and mistresses tried to make up the shortfall of money, which was getting bigger and bigger every week and was the most alarming amount, and did so by selling their mother's engagement ring and their mortgages, you know, they're cashing in their pensions, that kind of a thing. Why is it not possible to just give them back the money that they paid the post office, because there was no debt and they hadn't incurred a debt? So the post office profited fraudulently by really extorting money from people who didn't owe them any money. I would have thought it would be relatively simple to just calculate, how much did you pay in? Let's give it back.
And this is another very, very big question about this. Who audited the post office's accounts? Was it one of the big four accounting firms? Also, where did they think this money was coming from? And if you audited it, they would have seen a deficit which had to be filled. But hold on, why was there not a deficit? We're talking about large amounts of money. You've talked about £65,000, £100,000, whatever it was for a lot of these people. Huge, life-changing amounts of money, which then went into post office profits. It is absolutely horrendous. It's a total scandal, and we haven't heard the last of it yet.
Absolutely. And this gentleman this morning said that he had paid £157,000 for the post office, for the right to, you know, operate the post office. And then when he was found to be, they said, you know, embezzling money, they just locked the door and didn't let him back in again. What about that £159,000?
Well, yes, exactly, and loss of earnings and all the rest. So,
I know.
Yeah, no, there's so much to be calculated. It's such a complicated scandal and so many complicated things within it. But really, the sort of quick fix, the straightforward quick fix between now and the end of the year is that £75,000. instant repayment or instant compensation for these people, all those 555 who brought this class action. Also, the fact that their convictions will be overturned. They've got to sign this statement which says they've done nothing wrong, which I'm sure almost every single one of them has. There will be a few people, and that's an issue for the government, there is some financial impropriety, maybe or maybe not related to Horizon. That's a very interesting point as well.
Right, let's bring into this Fujitsu. Fujitsu are the people who supplied the computer system with a government contract for millions and millions of pounds, who continue to supply our government with all manner of computer systems.
You continue to operate Horizon.
And continue to operate Horizon. Now, this is a huge, voluminous Japanese conglomerate of a company. It's one of these behemoths of industry. It's vast. What is Fujitsu doing about this? Because obviously there were members of the Fujitsu board and staff and everything else who testified in court that there was nothing whatsoever wrong with the system, weren't there?
Well, there's a spotlight that has turned on two senior engineers, a man called Gareth Jenkins and a woman called Anne Chambers, and they were people who have given evidence previously. They would deny that they've done anything wrong, of course, but Gareth Jenkins, certainly, he was a senior engineer, was someone who asked for immunity from prosecution. He asked for it twice. Well, he said that he was giving evidence to the public inquiry on this. They didn't want that evidence to be used against him criminally. Now, that was denied by the public inquiry, probably quite understandably. But I think in terms of criminal charges, we don't know what's going to happen. They would deny any wrongdoing, I'm sure. But it'll be very interesting to see what individuals are brought who actually... Essentially, also, you've got to ask the question about individual help and support people. Do they have a script? Often when you ring a help desk of some description, you'll have a script. If it was on the script, that's to say, you're the only person this has happened to, which we kept hearing again and again.
That's the phrase we keep hearing.
Drama. You're the only person, even though that was a total lie. Yeah. Who wrote that script? Yeah. Who was the manager who told those people to say that to people, to lie to those people? There are lots of issues brought up by the documentary and the drama as well, in terms of whether there was, third-party interference with what actually went on in individual branches. People had been told previously, no, there's no way Fujitsu can get into your account essentially and change things. Well, we now know that that actually happened. So there's so many questions. Who was responsible? Who made the decisions? And the problem with so many public inquiries is that they say that, oh, there was a systematic failure. Well, systems are involved with people who operate those systems. So who are the people who are... there is a criminal inquiry as well that's looking into this. The Metropolitan Police is looking into this. But this will go on for years. This isn't going to go away for a long time.
One of the things I've been reading about is that there is, in Japan, in Japanese culture, a very strong sense of honour, which I think we already know, and also a very strong sense of shame. Shame is a kind of preeminent emotion and part of Japanese philosophy, more, I think, than it ever is in this country. And it is being suggested that the sense of shame that should be felt at Fujitsu should be kind of expressed and built up and kind of conveyed so that Fujitsu feel dishonourable about what's happened and has a sense of kind of corporate honour and does something about this to kind of ameliorate the shame.
And the question is about transparency as well. Also, talking about shame, I mean, will the Reverend Paula Vennells have any sense of repentance, for example?
She hasn't shown it yet, considering she was a whisker away from being Bishop of London.
Yeah, it was pretty terrifying. She gave her CBE back under a huge amount of public pressure.
And hasn't given, of course, the millions and millions of pounds. She was paid in bonuses over £3.5 million.
Yeah,
Nobody's quite
pension.
sure why.
Yeah,
Nobody's quite sure what she was being rewarded for.
CBE for
we know
services.
The post office isn't doing it all well. We all know that.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a lot of questions over this, and also about the culture in terms of people who are rewarded for failing upwards, essentially, who run these organisations and are then promoted and given other sinecures and other roles as well. Paula Vennells was one of those people. There are many other people involved in this scandal as well who have been rewarded. And I think there are lots of questions that people have fundamentally about the system, I think, about technology as well. We're always told, or we always think, well, technology can't fail, and we trust the post office, trust in public institutions, trust in technology, trust in what you're told. Well, okay, this is the system, therefore, the computer says you owe this amount of money. There are a lot of questions, I think, for HMRC. I think there are a lot of questions for anything that Fujitsu's been involved with, like, right across the government as well, and whether Fujitsu gets additional government contracts, because they're so bound up with so many IT contracts that the government does. This business is an absolutely huge, global, very important business. So does Keir Starmer say, right, well, we're actually not going to give any more government contracts to Fujitsu unless they're existing ones. They won't be allowed to tender for contracts, for example. Is that something he does? So there are lots of political questions about this as well, especially with an election coming up later this year.
The thing that's so uncomfortable about everything you're saying, Peter, really is this. You keep saying, and this is your job, and you're saying the correct thing. There are many questions to be asked. There are questions about the personnel, questions about Fujitsu, questions about compensation, questions about how you can compensate for a ruined life, questions that need to be asked about the people that, you know, said yes, said no. But I think lots of people at home listening, or at work listening, or in the car watching, whatever people are doing to this programme right now, will be thinking, my God, but how many more years?
Yeah.
And, you know, people are dying of old age, they're getting old, they're infirm. You know, questions being asked. These questions were being posed by Nick Wallace, the journalist who primarily broke the story, and the other people who worked on these stories 16, 17, 18 years ago. So the questions shouldn't be being asked now. The answers should have been concluded 10 years ago.
Oh, totally. I think there are so many pressures on government, certainly, to get this sorted very, very quickly. They want this sorted by the end of the year. They want to overturn those convictions and start the compensation process for people, some of whom have received some money, some of whom have received no money. They'll never fully rebuild their lives, but I think the fact that there is some sense of the government having some sort of grip on this will make the story erode a little bit, I think, as time goes on.
Thank you.